Hi everyone, we're live with Jamie Sinclair. Do you want to start us off with an intro to you and your books?
I will. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Caroline. For those who don't know, hopefully some do, I'm Jamie Sinclair, and I am a crime writer who also dabbles in other genres, based in the Northwest. Um, and I've been doing this for too many years to count, but I wrote my first book in 1999, and it wasn't a crime book. It was a very much of the moment, what used to be referred to as chick lit, because in 1999 that seemed to be all that was available, and I read a lot of Mike Gale and people like that. So I thought I'll do that, and then decided to start latterly writing what I read, and I read a lot of Ian Rankin. I read a lot of people like Mark Billingham, and I used to read a lot of Harlan Coben, and I thought I want to write books more like that. So that's what started me down the path of calling myself a crime writer or thriller writer. And I've done it ever since. And it was initially going to be a career, in the late 90s. It turned out that, unlike a fortunate handful, have yet to sell enough copies to be able to call it a career. So it is a very, very, very enjoyable hobby. And hopefully, as some may know, and this is fortuitous timing, but not planned in any way, my latest book, and the start of a new series, featuring Detective Inspector Joe Keegan, came out last Friday in paperback and on Kindle, and that's called Crossing the Line. And I just happen to have a copy there. And it would, given that it's December, make a lovely Christmas gift. And I suspect we may be going to talk a little bit more about that. And hopefully all things writing in the journey that involves. So that's me. Nice to see everybody. Nice to be here. Nice to be asked.
Yeah, wonderful. I tell a lie. I'm reading Beneath the Surface.
Oh, that's even better. Even
Uh,
better.
both set in Morecambe now. Is that
Yeah,
right?
I mean that's well, I now live in. I was brought up in Morecambe from the age of about 3. I am officially, um, from Bradford. I was born. I'm a Yorkshireman, um, but was dragged over, as a small child over to Morecambe because back then, and people might know Morecambe because of a series like The Bay, because that's made Morecambe a bit more famous. Morecambe was always one of those places that if people had heard of it, it's because they'd driven through it on the way to the lakes or something. But they didn't really know where Morecambe was. But at the time in the late 70s, it had a very booming tourist industry, and was very, very popular. And a lot of families like mine moved there to open little B&Bs and do fairly well out of it. And then, like a lot of seaside towns, that then declined, and people moved on to do other things. So I lived there from the age of about 3. I went to school there and moved away from there only about 4 years ago to live where I live now, and it's only half an hour down the road. So I still very much consider myself in and around Morecambe. So I suppose the old adage of write what you know is very much true. So all my books, bar one, are set in and around Morecambe and Lancaster, including the new one. And Beneath the Surface is, as you quite rightly say, very much set in and around Morecambe. And the buildings in it are Morecambe's most famous.
Are they? I don't think I've ever been to Morecambe, so.
You're not alone. I don't think. I think, actually, when I was a child, most people had probably been to Morecambe. I think now most people would say, "Where's Morecambe? What's Morecambe famous for?" It's very much a faded seaside glamour sort of place, as are so many former coastal resorts, now fairly derelict coastal towns. But it has a stunning view, um, as some of our fellow book club members will know, because one or two of our more well-known members live on the other side of Morecambe Bay. So we do share a view, and it's also famous for having 2 very big power stations, and ultimately that's about it these days. And of course now the Bay, which is on ITV, and hopefully at some point in the dim and distant future, my books. But that's a work in progress. We'll see how we end up. But
According to Sarah, who said hello to us, she said that Eric Morecambe is from Morecambe and
he
Poirot
is
filmed there.
Poirot. Yes, Eric Morecambe is, of course, from there, and he's probably, in fact, let's do a quick run through. Eric Morecambe, probably the most famous, and there is a statue of him on the promenade, which people come and take their pictures with. Thora Hird, also from Morecambe. Helen Worth, who was Gail in Coronation Street from Morecambe, and also, oh, who's the other one I was going to mention? Somebody else who is equally Victoria Wood from in and around Morecambe, of course. And some of her sketches, people might be familiar with things like the Two Soups sketch. That was based on a cafe in Morecambe that she used to go to quite famously. And the Poirot, absolutely true. The Poirot that you're talking about there was actually filmed in the Midland Hotel. And Caroline, as you know, that is the central focus of Beneath the Surface. So, me and Agatha Christie were, hand in hand.
There you go. It is, yeah, part of the Midland Hotel, isn't it? I like the little kind of hints of, I don't know, I want to call it supernatural. It's not. It's like visions and things like that, isn't there?
Yeah, it's and it's kind of it'd be one of those is when you say it out loud, it's like blimey, that sounds far fetched, and of course it is. But when I created those characters, who are essentially just me and my friends, and the dialogue is basically how we talk to each other, and obviously the setting is Morecambe's most famous building, and all the talk in the book around, as I've already said, about Morecambe's decline and things, that is very much a theme of the book, and the corruption that is featured throughout the book is actually all true. That's all well documented, and most of it happened. It's almost a biography of the town, to be fair. But I needed a way, and some might think it's lazy, but to allow myself a way whereby these two very amateur detectives, who are just a couple of friends who stumble into this, had a real challenge to overcome in terms of what would make Mitch stand out and be a bit of a pariah. And this gift when he was a child, and these dreams and these kind of things he saw that he couldn't explain, made him a bit of an outlier, because his default setting is to kind of tell people about it, and that led to him kind of being an outlier and bullied and picked on, and made him the kind of aggressive kind of character he is as an adult. And the only person who's ever really been able to put up with him is his best friend Rupert, who finds him as infuriating as he loves him, much as he loves him. But then when they stumble into the kind of the detective elements and the amateur sleuthing, it's almost by accident, because Mitch has kind of seen these things and he can't make head and a tail of them. But that leads them into the plot and into the story, because they're trying as much to make sense of what he's seeing as what's actually going on around them. So it's as confusing for them as it is for the police who are trying to make sense of it. But for those who haven't read it, it gradually all comes together. And it's fair to say there is very much some justice at the end of it. It would be fair to say.
Good, because we're not giving spoilers away because I haven't made it to the end.
Not for those who haven't read it yet. No, absolutely.
Well, yeah, we have a no spoilers policy anyway in the group.
Good.
People don't want to know, do they? They don't want to know where things are going to.
No, I mean there's almost nothing worse, is there? Especially when you're investing time in reading it, and especially if you're really enjoying it, and then someone says, "Oh yeah, that's the one where that happened," and you think, "Oh, thanks very much." Ruined it. Absolutely.
I've said this before on author chats, but there are certain authors where we buy as a family, like the Kindle version, the book version, and everyone reads it at the same time. Because if you let my dad read a book first, as you're reading it, he'll be like, "Oh, in the next bit, this happens." Or you'll really like this chapter, this happens in it. And when you get here,
Yeah, oh, my dad is a great one for that, because he has no filter and there's no malice or intent. But he did that with the latest Mark Billingham, with his new D.S. Miller character. And I was reading something else, and I'd sent my dad a copy of his birthday, and he rang, and then he started proceeding to tell me all about it over the phone. I said, "I haven't read it, Dad." And he was but that didn't stop him. He just persevered with basically doing a review / spoiler of the entire book. Yeah, infuriating, but there we are.
we still love them though, even though they do it. That's the trick to see in future. You get the same copies at the same time, read at the same time.
Yeah, make sure I read it either before my dad or at the same time as my dad. Absolutely,
Yeah.
or send him it after I've read it.
Yeah.
Perhaps more importantly, as a guarantee.
Those are the ways.
Hmm.
So there's 2 in that series that I'm reading. And
Yeah.
then your new one, still a
Mm.
bit a different character.
Yes, very, very much so. I mean, obviously there's a theme because they're set in the same place, and it's. I'm certainly not the first to do this, but crime fiction is a really good vehicle for just allowing you to kind of express an opinion or a view of things that will make sense of stuff that you maybe can't articulate in another way. So I use it to talk about, as I've already said, the state of Morecambe, because it's my hometown. Effectively, I care a lot about it and what happens to it, and I'm as angry as a lot of people as the decline of it and some of the decisions that were made. So I use the books to kind of voice that, and also present a vision of what I might quite like it to be. In terms of, and Beneath the Surface talks a lot about the kind of reimagining of Morecambe, which is yet to become real. And in the book, obviously they're looking to develop buildings and make something out of the decline. And that is still really yet to happen, but I'm hopeful that it will. And the sequel to that is, again, features Morecambe's, I suppose, other most famous building, because it only has 2 really, which is the Winter Gardens, and that's on the cover of the book. And that is a glorious building, proper old kind of Alhambra type theatre building that in its pomp was as good as any in the country, and just declined and declined and declined. But anyone and everyone in any genre of music or theatre or music hall played at the Winter Gardens in Morecambe, whether it was the Beatles or the Rolling Stones or Eric Morecambe or a million in between. Everybody played there in its pomp, and then it's getting better, but it was closed for years and really declined. But an absolutely stunning building. And again, I wanted to use the book to kind of talk about that, but also set a plot and hang a story around it in terms of it being part of a lot of the key scenes and used for a lot of the things. And again, it's geographically very handy for the Midland Hotel, which is kind of almost the HQ for Mitch and Rupert in Beneath the Surface. So for anyone who actually follows these things and knows the town, they can say, oh, actually, that is across the road. It's all kind of real and we can follow it in our heads and stuff. But it makes it easier for me when I'm writing it to kind of follow them around in terms of, when they go here or when they go there. And I'm a great one when I watch things like The Bay on ITV, which is filmed in Morecambe. As a local, you can always tell when they've edited it because they'll suddenly leave somewhere that I know is 20 minutes away, and they'll arrive a minute later in the car because they've edited because it's around the corner. All the locals know it's not around the corner. But in the books, I try and make it as real as possible. So if they are walking to a place, you could actually walk to that place. Just on the off chance someone local reads it and thinks, "Ooh, that's not right." But yeah, so they are a series, and hopefully there'll be more because I really like Mitch and Rupert's characters, because they're the most kind of like me. And my voice, whereas some of the other characters are also inspired by me, I suppose, and my voice, but as sort of versions of it. But Mitch and Rupert are very much the nearest thing to me and my friends, and the dialogue and the way we behave with each other is very much reflected in those 2 characters.
So your new one, that's a bit more kind of of a straight kind of police kind of
It
novel.
is, yeah. It's my first swing at that because I always kind of write something with a bit of a twist, as you said, with Beneath the Surface. Mitch has got some sort of a gift of some sort, and in I Remember You, which was more of a psychological thriller, there was more kind of a definite kind of now and then structure to the book all the way through. So it kind of jumped backwards and forwards all the way through and was very different. Whereas I'd never written anything that was, well, crime was a theme of most of the books. I've never written anything that, in terms of maybe shoehorning into an Amazon category, will be determined a police procedural or something like that. But I kind of wanted to explore that sort of thing because I've been reading a lot of Mark Billingham stuff recently, kind of revisited a lot of his Thorne books, which were always kind of long favourites of mine. And I've always read a lot of Ian Rankin. And then when I've kind of been working my way through some of the old Thorne books, which are really, really strong and really, really connect with me. And then when Mark Billingham started writing his DS Miller books, again set in Blackpool, so literally falling over distance from where I live now, that really connected in terms of that coastal setting and that kind of seaside town, and like a bigger version of Morecambe, I suppose. And that got me thinking. And I'd had this idea trotting around my head for a while, and it just became Joe Keegan. And once I'd started, and once I'd met his partner, Torrance, it was more the scenes where they interact with each other that started forming, and then I started to hang a bit of a plot around it because they just felt real really quickly. And it was very easy to write for them because they were already doing stuff. I just needed to steer, and I didn't really need to develop them a lot because they just arrived kind of ready to go, and it felt very natural just to start interacting with them and moving them around Lancaster and Morecambe, and it came together surprisingly quickly, and thoroughly enjoyed writing it, and it seems to have. It's only early days, but certainly the early reviews and it seems to have landed fairly well with folk, which is really, really nice, and certainly never ever taken for granted. So yeah, really, really happy with it, and there will definitely be another, and early words have been written.
Good. How worried were you about getting the procedure, the police stuff right?
Quite, because I know it's something that people take quite seriously. So I wouldn't pretend that it's meticulous, and I know in other books, I mean, much more well-known and capable writers than me always caveat it with, if there's mistakes in it, that's down to me, and I've taken a leap of faith or some artistic license with certain bits to make it work. So it's broadly there, I think, and it's fairly well researched, and a lot of it is based on real things and how real things would be done in terms of a lot of the processes and making those connections. So hopefully there aren't too many leaps where people think that just wouldn't happen. But in terms of the plot, because of some of the decisions Keegan makes, there are some kind of moments where, well, it's still within the parameters of process and procedure. He's kind of actively pushing against that, and in some cases smashing through that because his kind of moral compass compels him to do it. And that's kind of what I suppose that's the title in an essence. He's got his kind of that line of the procedure and what's acceptable as a police officer, but because of his background and his backstory and his kind of moral need to try and do the right thing, he's almost willing to break some of those rules to do what he feels is morally the right thing to do and to get what he sees as, I suppose, justice. And that justice for him is that the bad guys need to face some sort of justice. And in this first book, I'm kind of setting out the stall that he's that type of person that will maybe do things others might not to get it. A bit like Rebus in his early days. He wasn't shy at breaking rules and bending them enormously, and didn't always play well with others. And Keegan's probably in that mold, I think.
Fair enough. Did you sort of talk to any friendly police officers to help? Or?
Well, I used to work with a couple actually,
Well,
many moons ago, which was handy. So some conversations were had and references to various manuals and lots of Google searching and looking on various forums. But yeah, I used to work many moons ago. My first or second job in the NHS, a couple of retired policemen, because a lot of people, they retire at a certain age, but obviously they're by no means old and they want something to do and top up pension to stay active. So a couple of former policemen from Lancaster had come to do a little bit, just kind of driving vans and keeping active, working with me. And so I had a kind of ready source of chatting to these two chaps about not only kind of some of the process stuff and the procedure stuff, but also some of the kind of what's the interior of the building look like, lads, because they used to work in it. That was their base. So I could kind of say, well, whereabouts was the lift? And if the lift opens, where is that? And would that work? Or, would it matter if I moved it and stuff? So it just, some of it was just practical, logistical stuff, but handy just to bounce things off them, but without pretending that it's, it's 100%. But I suppose even if you watch anything, some of the really well-known crime fiction, there's always a little bit of license taken to balance with the plot and moving things along. But I like to think it's brought. Certainly, no one's come back to me in either the beta reading or the ARC stuff and said, "Blimey, Jamie, that's miles off." But somebody will at some point, and I will take it on the chin. But I suppose it's just balancing, having a bit of pace and a bit of plot with not getting too hung up on it. But I think it's broadly pretty good, and hopefully those who are familiar with the inside of Lancaster Police Station will think, yeah, that's not bad. It's broadly real.
You're not tempted to go with your vast experience in the NHS and write a kind of thriller set within that world?
Well, viewers, that has happened. So I've written a book called, this must be more than 10 years ago, but if you were to have a rummage around on Amazon or the internet in general at my back catalogue, you will find a book called The Trust. The Trust being what used to be, for those not familiar with the NHS, it used to basically be operated by what were called primary care trusts, and they don't really exist anymore. They're now called provider trusts, but the trust refers to that, and that was very much based in and around the NHS. Again, as a lot of my stuff is, it's actually wrapped around real events. So without giving anything away, because it's basically the opening of the book, the bodies that are discovered at the beginning of the trust are based on the very, very well publicised Porton Down anthrax type experiments that happened up in Scotland in the 40s or 50s or 60s. I forget when. People will know when that was. And that informs kind of the initial plot. And then in Lancaster, many moons ago, under one of the old mental health institutes, what used to be called asylums, there's a very well-known one in Lancaster called the Moor Hospital, which closed many moons ago when I was a child. And when they were redeveloping that to make it into housing, they discovered an awful lot of bodies under there. And the plot of the trust is based around that, because those events were real. But what I did was hang a plot around it in terms of how did they get there, what's been covered up, what did that look like. And it came about that some of the kind of more shadowy figures within the trust were involved in that and knew a lot more than they were letting on. And it fell to the police and some members of the trust to kind of work through that as the plot of the book. So that did happen. And I remember at the time, a few of my colleagues saying, you should be quite careful because some of this is quite close to the bone in terms of the NHS. And you might, if it was suddenly to become a bestseller or something, you might find yourself with some questions to answer. But a lot of it inspired by real events. But that's the only one I've ever written that does touch on my day job. And I've never gone back to it since, because I am quite careful that a lot of the stuff I'm involved with and working in the NHS isn't always public knowledge. So it's quite tricky. It's always easier to write about something that's not work as well. It's more relaxing.
Leslie said she likes the sound of the trust.
I think, actually, without over-egging it, it's, in terms of sales, I think it's either that or Beneath the Surface, but the trust certainly in its early years shifted some volume in terms of sales, just seemed to click with people. And I think that's probably reflected. I think if you look on Amazon, it's probably the one that's got by far the most reviews as well, and they're all broadly positive. And it ticks along nicely. And I've always intended to do a sequel, and a sequel is written, or was written at the time. But there are similarities in terms of the character. Tom Ashton, who is the detective in that book, it isn't a million miles away from Joe Keegan in the new book. Different setting, different town, different time, different style. But I suppose because I've written them both, not a million miles away. But maybe Joe Keegan and the new book is kind of the evolution of where the trust and that series might have gone. And then maybe Crossing the Line is almost the sequel to the trust that I never wrote, because if you read both, you would see an evolution of the character, I think. And the names are different, but the similarities there. But yeah, if you haven't read The Trust, another great present.
You're selling your presents for Christmas.
Well, it's the right time of year, isn't it?
Been trying to encourage people in the group actually to pick a new person, like a
I
new
think,
one,
I'm not,
and buy
yeah,
a book for them.
I think that's really good. I mean, obviously, we're all in the group and beyond the group in lots of other groups, familiar with our favourite authors and those within the group that are also really, really successful authors, and all power to them because they're famous and sell a lot of copies because they're very, very, very good. But there are an awful lot of us who don't, would absolutely massively benefit from things like this, but also from people discovering our books and buying one. And then if we all reciprocated, big group as well, it would have a massive impact. And for those writers who are really reliant on reviews and that kind of support, and maybe don't have the level of traction of some of the much bigger, well-established authors, what a great idea! Absolutely support it.
No, he's doing it. He's actively doing it. He's encouraging
Mm,
people in the group as much as he can, and he
yeah,
practices what he preached. Because I got a new book from an author in the group for my birthday yesterday from him.
brilliant idea. Yeah, really, really good idea.
He's obviously been shopping on the list of authors. Leslie also said Mike Craven's Fluke and Poe were very similar characters.
Yes, and again, in terms of set in a very real place that obviously Mike knows well, not a million miles away from where I live, and very much anchored there. And again, yeah, not dissimilar. And in terms of that outlook of not justice at all costs, but yeah, Addison Fluke's a kind of good example of this person's done something wrong, and there needs to be some sort of justice. And the process and procedure we've got to work within maybe isn't going to allow me to do that, so I'm going to go and do it anyway. And to hell with it. And that doesn't necessarily always play well with others. And Joe Keegan's not unlike that. And for me, it was just finding a balance of how far I could push it without people thinking he was almost a bad guy, because obviously I needed him to remain very much the good guy, and so that the reader could get behind him, but also make it that even though he was literally crossing a few lines and breaking a few rules, that people would think, yeah, that's fair enough, because that probably needs to happen, because there needs to be a little bit of justice for this person.
There seems to be quite a draw at the moment, doesn't there, to like a lot of northern kind of crime writing. That seems to be a thing that's getting really popular. So things sort of properly rooted up here. So like yours in Morecambe being a perfect example.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, northern writing's always been there. There certainly seems to be, and obviously the rest of the country might disagree, but yeah, there certainly seems to be a lot of it there at the minute. And it's not an accident that Mark Billingham set his new character in Blackpool. He's not done that by accident. Because I know enough about Blackpool. I'm familiar enough to know he's obviously spent time there and researched it, because it's not a fictitious Blackpool. It's real streets and it's real places. So someone's been and walked around it and got familiar with it. And again, Mike Craven stuff very much set in the north, and lots of other stuff. And I know plenty of some of our better known members of the group set a lot of their stuff in the Lake District and in and around, and that's a superb place to set things. And I set a lot of stuff in Morecambe, and obviously the Bay is set in Morecambe, and the guy that wrote it, I think, went to Lancaster Uni. So yeah, there's an awful lot of stuff going on, but across the north, into Yorkshire and other places, there's a lot of it. And I don't know if it's maybe always been there, or maybe it's just taken off and it's become more popular. And so then that feeds it, and then more people start to do it. But there certainly seems to be an audience for it at the moment. And obviously, as someone who sets his stuff in the north and is based in the north and is a big advocate of all things northern, long may it continue. And hopefully, I'm selfish enough to admit I hope I benefit from it, because I've been ploughing along a long time writing these books. So it would be lovely if there was a massive explosion. But yeah, all for it. It's a great place to live.
Of northern crime festivals coming up as well. Do you get involved in any of those?
I haven't, and it's one of those things where it's purely a time balance, and the day job and in no way begrudge it, because the day job is what's giving me everything. The day job takes up pretty much 95% of all my time, and there's a reason why I don't put out more books, and it's the day job. Because ideally, I would merrily squirrel away at the laptop and churn out all the myriad of ideas I've got at a much faster rate of knots, but time just doesn't allow. And it's always a balance between getting time to write, but also then, like at the moment, because I've got a new book out, doing it a little bit of justice with adverts and promo, and making the product look halfway professional, and then finding more time to write, but also doing the day job. And I would love to be more involved in things like the festivals and going to places. It is generally just a time thing, in terms of balancing it with the day job. It will come. It's just finding that balance at the moment. As I said to you earlier, my job is one of those that, just because of what I do, it's quite hard to squeeze in other things around it. And of course, I cover a lot of the north, so there's elements of travel as well. But it was something I need to kind of factor in, and over the next few years, hopefully find a bit more balance to do, what I want to do at work in the day job, but also more time to write and more time to be proactively involved in festivals and other more face-to-face stuff. Even, I look on with envy at members of the book club who go to do a lot of library events or other similar things. I think, just the time to do it, because I suppose for me it will be taking time off work to go and do those things, and it's just a challenge. But I accept that there aren't necessarily hours in the day to do everything, but I'm hopeful that time will come. But yeah, something to work on. But for now, probably focusing on writing as much as I can, and hopefully the rest will come.
Yeah, I'd like to go to a lot more book festivals than I can make it to.
They always look really good when I see the photos and the comments in the book club on when people have been like, it looks brilliant. Yeah, it will come. And I think if a friend of mine and my wife's, she's just had a book out. She's based in Southport, and she's in a very fortunate position where she's just recently retired. So she's got a sudden influx of time where she's doing events at Waterstones and all sorts of stuff, and traveling to festivals and doing interviews. And I think, oh, that would be lovely. But it will come, and I certainly don't begrudge anybody the time. So it will come, and all of a sudden I will have more time. But I certainly don't want to give anyone the impression I don't absolutely love the day job, because I'm very passionate about it, and it's given me an awful lot of opportunity. So it's just finding that perfect balance between the two things.
Yeah, it can be tricky, can't it? Especially if you're quite a busy day job.
Yeah, it's full on. I mean, the NHS. I mean, I don't often talk about it, but the NHS is, as most people will know, especially if they work in it, it generally doesn't stop. So the more you give it, the more it will take of you. And if you're the sort of person that wants to be involved and do more and more and more and be involved, then there will always be more time that you can give to it. And because I'm passionate about it and I genuinely love it, I will always do more. And there's case in point tonight, actually, when you sent me the link for this just before we went live, I was still tapping away at the laptop doing a few bits. And it slipped my mind completely, because I was thinking, right, I'll just do this next thing and I'll prep this for tomorrow. And then the link popped up and I thought, oh, hang on, we're doing something more fun now. Stop working. But I enjoy the work, and it's really rewarding in all sorts of ways, in a different way to the writing. So I wouldn't swap it, because I'm very fortunate that I have a job I really enjoy, and I don't pretend otherwise. It's not something I would want to not do. And the writing is just as enjoyable, but very different, and the two balance well. There's only so many hours in the day.
Leslie said she missed the beginning. What is the day job?
The day job, I work in the NHS, and I've done that for, quick look at the calendar, just over 21 years now, nearly 22 years. Done lots of different stuff in that time, Leslie and others. But at the moment, I work in cancer now, not as a clinician. I'm a director for cancer services, and I'm in charge of, broadly, I'm in charge of cancer services for the entire northeastern Yorkshire. That's what I do. So I keep an eye on that. So big old area and quite a lot of responsibility. But I like to think that me and my team and all the absolutely ridiculously talented and capable people I work with are making a difference. And I know we are, because I get to see that every day. But you can probably imagine how much time that takes up, because a lot of it's the bureaucratic stuff that people don't get to see that kind of gets in the way. And a lot of my job is trying to get that stuff out of the way so that we can spend money in the right places, so that people get seen and looked after and treated and get the best quality care. But a lot of my job is kind of trying to move the blockers out of the way, so that the people with the talent and the skill to actually do those things are free to do it without having other things in the way. But you can maybe imagine or not how often that those two conflict with each other and gets in the way. But it time consuming, it's fair to say, but very rewarding when it goes well.
Yeah, I can imagine it sounds very rewarding when it goes well. So we've answered Leslie's question there. That took us very away from the books, though.
Well, it's all, I suppose it's all, it does, but it's all inspiration, because there are so many stories within it. Like I talked about the trust before, which was inspired by the day job, or the day job I had at the time, which was in the NHS. But I meet so many people in and around work, hundreds and hundreds of people all the time, because it's such a big job. And everyone's got a story to tell, and it's all inspiration. And it might just be a snippet that someone says, or a frustration someone shares, or a comment someone makes, and you'll suddenly find yourself writing that into a scene in a book, or it will frame a conversation or something. So lots of it will work its way in. So the day job is often a source of inspiration, not in terms of the actual stuff I do, but the conversations I have and the people I meet, often the names of the characters, is a frequent source of inspiration that I take from the day job. So it is good. And a lot of the travel I do, and I don't travel as much as I probably should with the day job, but sitting on trains is a really good way of just having focused time, because obviously you can't be in a meeting when you're on a train. So, but always have laptop will travel. So it's always a good way. The train to Leeds, for example, or the train to York, 2.5 hours from where I live. Good opportunity to sit and tap out a few words, and a lovely view as you go through Hebden Bridge and places like that. So all of which you'll be familiar with, Caroline. So yeah, there are ways to make it work, and there's always inspiration to be taken from work, even though it does take up a lot of time.
True. You get fun stories as well, I think, from work. Well, I do. As a teacher, you get some very fun.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and a lot of the dialogue and a lot of the stuff I use is stuff people have said to me when I've been chatting to people at work, or through work, or people I've met through work. And it's always, there's always something you can use in a scene somewhere. Sometimes it takes ages. It doesn't go in the next book. It goes in the book after that. But it all of a sudden it'll pop up like, oh yeah, when that chap said that, or when that lady said that, and you just drop in a phrase or a comment that someone said. But that's part and parcel of having a job where you spend most of your day chatting to people about stuff, usually trying to resolve problems. But I spend most of my day basically doing what we're doing now, but usually with chief execs of hospitals, but trying to resolve common problems and finding solutions to them. But the only way to do that is through chatting to them to understand it, and then that kind of translates to the books, because you're essentially using your characters to solve problems and find solutions to stuff. So it kind of translates, at least it does in my head.
Good. While we're off topic, let's try and get us vaguely back on. What have been your reads of the year?
Well, mentioned a couple of them, and again, it's always subjective, isn't it? But this is going to be controversial, so I'll be careful how I say it. I'm a big Mark Billingham fan, but I hardly dare say it because I can just imagine the backlash. I felt that maybe his thorn got a little bit, dare I say it, a little bit like he'd done a lot of them. And I wondered when he came up with the D.S. Miller character, I wondered if that was maybe him thinking, yeah, maybe I need to try something different because I've done a lot of these. and that character really landed with me, and the setting in Blackpool really landed. So really enjoying the first two of those. I think the second one did come out this year, so they've both been brilliant. I think The Last Dance and I forget the name of the other one, but they've both been brilliant. Kind of light, because Mark's really good at kind of that light touch. His dialogue's quite light. He's very good at saying, describing really dark scenes and serious stuff, but with a kind of light, easy to read. Doesn't get too bogged down in it being too weighty, and it's easy to read but engaging. So really enjoyed those. The latest Ian ranking, which just happens to be I'm sat at my desk in my office, and in between meetings, I've been reading this, and again, anything Ian ranking, genius. Won't have a word said against him. Not always everyone's cup of tea, but top drawer. So that is up on the list, and bit more left field perhaps, and certainly not everyone's cup of tea, but the new Bob Mortimer, the Hotel Avocado, and that, I think that's been a little bit Marmite. It's polarized opinion a bit, and I think if you're a fan of Bob Mortimer and kind of his style of comedy and what he does, and the kind of, I'm a not dissimilar age to Bob, and I was kind of a fan of Bob Mortimer and his partner Vic Reeves when I was at school as a teenager. They were on TV a lot, so I kind of grew up with his style of comedy, and the books that he's written, the two books and the new one, the Hotel Avocado. It's, if you're familiar with Bob's voice and his comedy, it's almost basically just like he's written about his own day out. It's very much that, and he's kind of loosely hung a murder mystery around it. But I know it doesn't work for everybody, but because I'm a big fan of Bob's, really enjoyed Hotel Avocado. So probably those, yeah. I again, because of time, I don't read as much as I would like, but as you've probably seen, crime fiction, Mark Billingham, Ian Rankin, those sorts of books, lighter stuff like Bob Mortimer has now dipped his toe in the water of sort of nominally writing crime fiction. Really like, and then every time Stephen King puts out a book, pre-order it, get it on day of release, love it. Really like his Holly character, but again, for me, he's a master craftsman in terms of how he weaves a tale. So every book I read of his, I learn something from it, and hope one day to be able to deliver something even a tenth of as well crafted as what he does. So yeah, non-stop. But again, entirely subjective. But anything broadly crime fiction is very much my cup of tea.
I find Stephen King a bit Marmitey.
Can be. He went through, and again, people will always have a view on him. He went through a period when he was at his most prolific, probably around the kind of Insomnia, Rose Madder, Gerald's Game period, where I certainly would never criticize him because I think he's as good as it gets. He was almost so prolific that he didn't always end the book particularly well. Sometimes almost like he'd started the next one, and I've seen a lot of other people say similar. He tells a great story, but he's not always great at endings. I think when he's on top form, he's as good as it gets. But sometimes he can be a little bit. His endings aren't always great, and he sometimes asks you to take a little bit of a leap of faith with some of his stories as well. But I think he's often at his best when, and latterly, obviously really well known as a horror writer, but I can't remember the last time he really wrote a horror book. He tells great stories, and he's more his Holly books and his more detective-y books, but he still has the darker edge to them. It just allows him to tell a really good, strong story without having to worry about a lot of the fantastic kind of darker stuff he used to put in his books. But I think his description and his setting and his use of place and his for me, it's always landed well, and his ability to draw you in pretty much from page one. He creates a place and a world that feels believable really quickly, and takes you on that journey. And at his very best, he's able to make the largely unbelievable seem fairly real and believable. Yeah, I'd certainly take a lot from his books.
Sarah says there's a new Thorn next year. Leslie said she thinks Stephen King takes too long to get to the point. The Institute took 30 chapters to even get to the Institute. I don't disagree with Leslie. No, I don't. When I said he was Marmitey, what I find with Stephen King is I either read his books and love them, or I don't finish them.
Yeah.
And they're one or the other. Like, I either really like them or I don't get to the end.
Yeah, I don't. I think some of his best stuff, he often puts out anthologies of short stories, and they're really accessible because it almost takes away the because he does. I mean, it's no secret that certainly with Stephen King, the books often get longer. If you look at Carrie, which was a couple of 100 pages long and brilliant in sort of the mid 70s before he was famous, and then you look at books like The Institute, which is probably 700 pages. Could it stand a good editing? Probably. Yeah, I don't disagree. And I think actually on that point, Leslie and others, I think people will be able to Google it while I'm talking probably. I think his new one that's due out imminently, I think it's his longest book ever. I think we're kind of in, Harry Potter 900-page territory. It's I think it's a fairly weighty beast. So that might not be for everybody.
Wasn't the stand 1,000 pages?
Yeah, so he's not scared of getting carried away. But maybe that's because maybe he's got no one to say to him, Stephen, just you don't necessarily need to spend 300 pages telling us about the journey from the Dark Tower to that point. Just say he walked across there, and it'll get us there. But yeah, he does like a good old description, does Stephen King, and he does like to often tell us a lot about a character and their backstory and what's going on in their head, and that does. And if it works for you, it's great. But I do accept he's not shy at using all the pages. Absolutely.
I prefer his son, Joe Hill.
I've only read a bit. I've only read a little bit, actually.
I will read anything he writes.
Yeah, and I think his wife's written a few as well, hasn't she, Tabitha? And I've not read any of hers either. But that's the best thing about, I suppose, best thing about books. They're obviously massively subjective, and no one's going to like everything that everyone does. And I wouldn't pretend that all of Stephen King's books are all my favourites, but I think when he's at his absolute best, he's fairly peerless. But yeah, it doesn't always stick the ending, and can often, as others have said, can take a while.
What are you working on right now? So we've got
out. Is what? Sorry.
We've got Crossing the Line out.
We have, yes.
What you're working on.
Well, a sequel, believe it or not. Just because I really, after I'd written, what had I written? I decided after a while ago, I wanted, because I'm kind of not tied to doing anything specific, I've been reading a few kind of psychological thrillers, I suppose, for want of a better way of putting it. And I thought, just as a way of doing something different, I thought, I wonder if I could write something like that that's not just, police or detective. And so I did. And it took a few swings at it to get it right, to make it not just a crime thriller and not just a fairly meandering roam through. And it was set in the village I lived in at the time, just north of Morecambe. It's entirely set in that village, and the people in it were basically all our neighbours. And the pub was our local village pub. It was entirely set there, and was very much noted by everyone who read it who lived there. But that became I Remember You, and that did fairly well, but was very much not, for people who have read any of my stuff, it was very much not what people expected me to put out. And so it wasn't jarring, I think, but people read it and kind of like, oh, this is different. And I was like, different, good. They were like, different, yeah. It's not horrible, but will you be writing another crime book next? But it was good, and it went down okay. But then I wanted to. I'd had this idea of Joe Keegan bouncing around my head for a bit, and the idea of doing something like that. And as I said to you earlier on this, I just kind of fell in love with him and Torrance straight away, because they kind of arrived fully formed and ready to go, and the setting was ready to go because I always set them in and around Morecambe and Lancaster because it's where I live. And I knew as I was writing the ending to Crossing the Line, no spoilers, that I basically teed it up nicely for the start of book 2. It's ready to go. And the draft of book 2 is there. There's kind of 80-odd thousand words, which will need a lot of chopping and shaping and deleting and moving into other areas and changing for better words. But it's there. So then the process of making that something more readable will begin. But yeah, so there will be a sequel to Crossing the Line, and there will be, hopefully, in my mind, I'd like Joe Keegan to be a bit of a series, because I've had stabs at it before, but never really. I did two with Mitch and Rupert, did the Beneath the Surface and the follow up, and I'd like to do more with them in the future because they're great characters. But Joe Keegan's got my full attention at the moment, and even doing the promo for it and the adverts and talks like this brings a smile to my face, rattling on about him, because he is cool, and even the stuff he gets up to that aren't work related, like when he goes to the pub and has a drink, and the way he talks with the barman and stuff, it just all feels so real when he's meandering around doing all that, and when he's falling out with his wife and stuff. It's just I enjoy talking about him and reading about it when I was editing it and working with the editor on it. So yeah, at the moment, can't get enough of him, and very much want to develop it and see where he goes. And Torrance, as his sidekick, has got so much going on in her life, bless her. And I already know, and again, I won't spoil it for anyone, but she's going to have a really challenging book too, bless her. And it's really going to test their relationship, Keegan and Torrance's relationship, because she has a really challenging time in book two, and will need a lot of support that Keegan, as readers of book one, will know, support that Keegan's not necessarily brilliant at giving, but will, because it's Torrance, he will do his best. So yeah, there'll be a sequel. It'll be there. I won't commit to when, because as we've established, day job, but it's coming. And I suppose the best way to make that happen quicker is to buy Crossing the Line, people. That's the way to get it done. Support.
So when Netflix come calling, because the Bay's been so successful and they want the next big Morecambe TV adaptation, what character would you play in the adaptation?
Do you know what? If I was, this is something I think people ponder, and I think one or two of our members are probably looking up to actively be pondering who will be playing who in the upcoming adaptations of their books, and good luck to them. But
who would be playing who, but who would you be?
Yeah, who would I be? I think I'd probably be a little bit like many moons ago when who's the chap that wrote Morse? I've forgotten his name.
Colin Dexter.
When Colin Dexter used to do little walk-ons in all the adaptations, and they'd just be in the background meandering past. I'd like to do a little bit of that, so that people who are watching it be like, "Oh, there he is! He's in that scene." But there's a barman called Mick in Crossing the Line, who is nominally kind of Irish, Dublin-y accent, but we could work with that because Netflix wouldn't bother about that, I don't think. And I wouldn't mind necessarily being like the barman, like the confidant. So when Joe Keegan's trotting into his local pub, the upstairs downstairs, for a much needed pint or six after a particularly testing day of falling out with folk, that could be me. I could be the guy behind the bar pulling the drinks and being the confidant, and keeping a weather eye on Keegan and making sure he gets home in the taxi at the end of the night. So if I was going to pick it, plus I wouldn't be on screen too much to make a ham-fisted mess of it. So I wouldn't mind doing that.
That bar appears in the other series as well.
Yeah,
downstairs, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's a really good reason for that. Partly because it's real, so it's easy for me to write about. And that version of the pub no longer exists. The version of the pub I write about in the upstairs is the version I went to when I was young, when it was a thriving kind of buzzing kind of. It was our local. It's not like that anymore. And it's really handily situated in terms of being a focal point in all the books, because you can kind of walk to it from the Midland Hotel or from the Winter Gardens or from where Joe Keegan lives. It's just handy, and it is on the prom. And the barman, the manager in the books, he was Mick, the landlord, was a real guy. When I used to drink in there when I was younger with me, my mates used to go in after work, and we'd have a pint in the upstairs. Mick was the guy. He was and a lot of the stuff that happens in that pub really happened. So things like, there's a scene in Crossing the Line where, obviously, smoking in pubs, that's not allowed. But Mick was one of these. It's my pub, I'm not having it. So Mick would have a cigarette in his own pub and encourage others to do just the same. And the scenes in Crossing the Line where that happens, where he's openly smoking in front of Keegan, and it's like, well, it's my pub. And Mick used to do stuff like that. Or he'd have a lock-in because the law said you have to close at 11, but Mick fancied a drink till 1 o'clock, so he'd invite his friends to stay and do it with him, and it was his pub, and that's how it worked. And it was that sort of stuff that often you don't get away with and is frowned on, but you could argue doesn't do a lot of harm and makes it good for the for the regulars in the community. And it worked for us, and it was such a lovely spot, and I have such fond memories of it. And it no longer exists, so it's kind of a memory of something that no longer exists that I use in the book as a fond reminder. And the upstairs does feature in multiple books, and probably will keep doing in some form or another, because it's just a little bit of a touchstone of a fond memory for me, I suppose, of a Morecambe that no longer exists, because the Morecambe I grew up in was buzzing and thriving, and that's not there anymore. So I kind of reflect it in the books that with a fondness that hopefully comes across, that I love the place and I would love it to become vibrant. And if things like the Bay and the Eden Project and God knows what else can help bring some investment to places like Morecambe, then I am front and centre for it.
So if people were doing a walking tour of Morecambe to look for the places, that's not going to be a thing they're going to find.
No, I'll tell you what, if people want to come to a walking tour of Morecambe, I'll take them. Jump on a bus and I'll walk you around, and we'll go up the upstairs and we'll have a drink. And if you buy a copy of my book, I'll buy you a pint. I might live to regret that. What if loads of people come?
There's going to be a whole UKCBC trip.
Wouldn't that be brilliant? We could do a northern face to face. Let's all come and have afternoon tea at the Midland. So yeah, if you're going to do a walking tour, park up on the prom. There's loads of empty car parks now, and go to the Midland and have an afternoon tea, because that's pretty good. Go and take your picture with the Eric Morecambe statue, because it's kind of the ritual now. Go into some of the arcades, because one of my oldest friends still owns 2 or 3 of them on the promenade, so you'll be helping him out. Go and put some money in the penny slots and all that sort of stuff. And then have a wander around the Winter Gardens, because it's open and they are always actively fundraising to try and bring it back to its former glory. And it's a stunning building. So across the road, go and have a nose around the Winter Gardens. Get yourself an ice cream from Bruciani's, which is next door, because it's kind of old, still owned by the same Italian family that have been there since like the 20s or 30s. Go and have an ice cream, they're brewing there. And then probably by that point, maybe get some fish and chips, eat them on the prom, because that's tradition. And then early evening, wander back down and have a pint in the upstairs. It's not the upstairs of my youth, but it's still there and it's still open and it's still a pub, and you'll be able to say you've been in. So yeah, that's a good way to kill an afternoon.
There you go. Leslie's saying to me that we should book the coach.
There you go. I don't want to overcommit, but yeah, if you're going to come, I'll take an afternoon off work and go around and do those things. Conditioned by a copy of the book if you're going to come.
There you go.
We can go and visit the places in the book.
But you have to have read the book.
There you go. One leads to the other. Perfect.
Yeah, perfect. We've solved it. We've made it. You're now going to have a second or third job doing.
Walking tours of Morecambe tour guide.
Yeah, there are authors that do that. Take people on tours of their locations.
A friend of mine who works in marketing and is based in Morecambe, and the fellow that runs and owns the arcades and other things, if he was listening to this, he'd already be planning what that was going to look like. He'd be doing leaflets and some sort of social marketing, and he'd be ready to go. And he'd have the bus liveried up and sorted by Monday, because that's just very much his game. He would, if there was an opportunity to somehow monetize that, he would be all over it, and he would love it. Be bussing people in.
Brilliant. Well, there you go. We'll get in contact. That's all. And then we're at time. So remind people what they're going to buy to come on their walking tour to Morecambe.
All right, then, if I must. It was released on Black Friday just last week. It's out in what is clearly a paperback and on Kindle for those who prefer something digital. And it's the first Detective Inspector Keegan novel. It's called Crossing the Line, and it's clearly set at the seaside, as you can see. And it's hopefully the first of many. So easy to purchase. It's on Kindle. It's there to be had. It's on paperback. Whatever suits you. And if I see you in Morecambe, I'll sign you a copy. Perfect time of year, makes a lovely gift.
Wonderful. Well described. And
Thank you.
all that's left to say is thanks for joining us.
It's been an absolute pleasure. I watched these with interest, and I've long wanted to take part. So it's been an absolute nerve-wracking delight to be involved.
Well,
And
we
I
know where you
thank
are
you for
now.
your patience. Thank you. You've been lovely with me and very patient. Thank you very much.